Marcus Thompson limped through the ruins of what used to be downtown Seattle, his mechanical left leg clicking softly against the broken concrete. The alien invasion had ended 3 years ago, but the scars remained everywhere. Twisted metal from destroyed buildings jutted up like broken teeth, and strange crystalline growths left behind by the Zephyrian forces still pulsed with faint purple light in the shadows. The 72-year-old veteran adjusted his worn military jacket against the morning chill. His weathered hands, marked with laser-burn scars from the war, gripped his walking stick tighter as he navigated around a crater that used to be a coffee shop. Marcus made this walk every morning, checking the abandoned sectors for survivors or anything useful. Most people avoided these areas, but Marcus had seen worse things than empty buildings and alien artifacts. He had served in 3 human wars before the aliens came, losing his leg in the last one. When the Zephyrians invaded Earth with their towering biomechanical ships and energy weapons that could melt steel, Marcus thought he was too old to fight again. But when they started targeting civilian centers, something in his soldier's heart wouldn't let him sit idle. He joined the resistance, teaching younger fighters everything he knew about warfare and survival. The morning sun cast long shadows between the skeletal remains of skyscrapers as Marcus turned into what used to be Pioneer Square. His keen eyes, still sharp despite his age, caught movement near an overturned delivery truck. At first, he thought it might be another scavenger, but the movement was wrong. Too fluid, too careful. Marcus approached slowly, his hand moving instinctively to the plasma pistol on his hip. The war might be over, but dangerous things still lurked in the ruins. Rogue alien technology, unstable energy sources, and sometimes worse things that nobody talked about. As he got closer, Marcus saw it clearly for the first time. A creature about the size of a large dog lay trapped beneath a section of the truck's twisted metal frame. Its body was covered in midnight black fur that seemed to absorb light, making it difficult to see clearly. But what made Marcus stop breathing for a moment were the eyes. They were large, intelligent, and glowed with a soft amber light that definitely wasn't human. The creature wasn't moving much, and Marcus could see dark fluid pooling beneath it. Blood, though it looked more purple than red. One of its legs was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle, and there were several deep cuts across its sleek body. It was dying. Marcus had seen plenty of alien species during the war. The Zephyrians themselves were tall, insectoid creatures with multiple arms and faces like metallic beetles. Their shock troops were bioengineered monsters that looked like walking nightmares. This creature was different. Despite its alien features, there was something almost familiar about it. Something that reminded him of the stray cats he used to feed behind his apartment building. The creature's amber eyes fixed on Marcus as he approached, and he could see intelligence there. Not just animal cunning, but real awareness. It wasn't trying to attack or run. It was just watching him with what looked like resignation. Like it had accepted its fate but wanted to see what this human would do. Marcus knelt down slowly, his mechanical leg whirring softly as it adjusted. Up close, he could see more details. The creature's fur had an almost liquid quality to it, shifting and rippling even though there was no wind. Its ears were pointed and mobile, constantly twitching and adjusting like satellite dishes. Most striking were its paws, which were larger than a normal cat's and had opposable thumbs with retractable claws that gleamed like polished obsidian. "Easy there, big guy," Marcus said softly, using the same tone he'd used to calm wounded soldiers. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature's ears perked up at his voice, and its head tilted slightly. Marcus could have sworn he saw surprise in those glowing eyes. It made a sound, not quite a purr and not quite a growl, but something that sounded almost like it was trying to communicate. Marcus examined the metal pinning the creature down. It was a section of the truck's rear door, twisted and heavy but not impossible to move if he used the right leverage. The problem was that moving it might cause more injury to the already wounded animal. "This is probably going to hurt," Marcus told the creature, "but it's the only way to get you out of there." He positioned his walking stick under the metal and found a fulcrum point on a chunk of concrete. As he began to apply pressure, the creature watched him with those intelligent eyes. When the metal shifted and must have caused pain, it made that strange sound again but didn't try to bite or scratch him. With a grinding screech, the metal lifted enough for the creature to crawl free. It moved slowly, clearly in pain, but managed to drag itself a few feet away before collapsing again. Marcus could see the damage more clearly now. The broken leg, the cuts, and what looked like burn marks along its side. Marcus had basic medical training from his military service, but he'd never treated an alien before. Still, wounded was wounded, and some things were universal. He pulled a first aid kit from his backpack, one of many supplies he always carried on his morning walks through the ruins. "I'm going to try to help you," he said, moving slowly so he wouldn't startle the creature. "I don't know if this stuff will work on you, but it's better than nothing." The creature watched as Marcus cleaned its wounds with antiseptic wipes. Its fur was incredibly soft, softer than anything he'd ever touched, and it seemed to shimmer with an inner light. When he applied the antiseptic, the creature tensed but didn't pull away. If anything, it seemed to understand that he was helping. The broken leg was the biggest problem. Marcus had splinted human limbs before, but this was different. The creature's bone structure seemed similar to Earth cats, but the joints moved in ways that didn't quite match. He did his best, using gauze and medical tape to create a makeshift splint that would keep the leg stable. Throughout the entire process, the creature remained calm. It watched Marcus work with those glowing amber eyes, and occasionally made that strange sound that seemed almost like it was talking. When Marcus finished bandaging the worst of the wounds, the creature struggled to sit up and looked directly at him. What happened next would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. The creature opened its mouth and spoke. Not in English, but not in animal sounds either. It was clearly language, with complex tones and what sounded like grammatical structure. The words flowed like music, beautiful and alien, but definitely communication. The creature was trying to tell him something. Marcus sat back on his heels, stunned. During the war, humans had never managed to communicate directly with any alien species. The Zephyrians used translation devices when they bothered to communicate at all, which wasn't often. They were more interested in conquest than conversation. But this creature was trying to talk to him directly. "I'm sorry," Marcus said slowly, "I don't understand your language." The creature tilted its head again, those amber eyes studying his face intently. Then, it did something that made Marcus's breath catch. It reached out with one of those hand-like paws and gently touched his arm. The contact sent a strange tingling sensation through his skin, not unpleasant but definitely alien. Suddenly, images flashed through Marcus's mind. Not his own memories, but something else. He saw vast cities that seemed to be grown rather than built, with towers that spiraled up into cloudy skies. He saw beings like the creature he'd rescued, but walking upright and wearing what looked like organic armor. He saw spaceships that moved like living things, flowing through the void between stars. And then, he saw the attack. The same Zephyrian ships that had devastated Earth, descending on those beautiful cities. The creatures fighting desperately with weapons that fired beams of pure energy, but being overwhelmed by the Zephyrians' superior numbers. He saw evacuation ships launching into space, carrying refugees to safety. And he saw this particular creature, much younger than, being loaded onto one of those ships as its city burned below. The images faded, leaving Marcus gasping. The creature had withdrawn its paw and was watching him carefully, as if gauging his reaction. "You're a refugee," Marcus whispered. "Your people were attacked by the same aliens that came after us." The creature made that musical sound again, and somehow Marcus knew it was confirmation. This being wasn't some random alien that had wandered into Earth's ruins. It was a survivor, just like him. Its people had fought the same enemy and lost everything, just like Earth had. Marcus looked around at the devastated cityscape surrounding them. "What are you doing here? How did you end up trapped under that truck?" The creature seemed to understand his questions, but it couldn't make him understand its answers. It gestured weakly toward the ruins with one paw, then touched its chest and made a sound that conveyed deep sadness. Marcus got the impression that it had been searching for something or someone among the ruins and had gotten caught when part of the building collapsed. The sun was getting higher, and Marcus knew he needed to get the injured creature somewhere safe. His own apartment was several miles away, but there were closer options. An old subway station that he'd converted into a supply cache was only a few blocks away. It would provide shelter while the creature healed. "Can you travel?" Marcus asked, knowing the creature couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone would convey the meaning. The creature struggled to stand on 3 legs, keeping the splinted one off the ground. It took a few tentative steps and nearly fell, but Marcus was there to steady it. The creature leaned against him, and he could feel the alien warmth of its body through his jacket. They made their way slowly through the ruins, Marcus supporting the creature's weight and guiding it around the worst obstacles. Several times, the creature stopped and made that musical sound, and Marcus found himself responding as if they were having a conversation, even though he couldn't understand a word. As they walked, Marcus noticed other things about his companion. Its ears were constantly moving, picking up sounds he couldn't hear. Its nose twitched as it sampled scents in the air, and those amber eyes missed nothing. Whatever species it belonged to, they were clearly more aware of their environment than humans were. They also seemed to have some kind of technology integrated into their biology. The creature's claws occasionally sparked with tiny electrical discharges, and, when it was in pain, Marcus could see patterns of light moving beneath its fur like some kind of internal circuitry. The subway entrance came into view just as the creature started to stumble more frequently. Marcus half-carried it down the broken escalator and into the tunnels below. His cache was in an old maintenance room that he'd sealed and stocked with supplies. It wasn't much, but it was warm and dry and safe. Marcus helped the creature settle onto a pile of salvaged blankets, then lit a small camping lantern. In the soft light, the creature's fur seemed to glow even more brightly, and those amber eyes reflected the flame like mirrors. "Rest," Marcus said, settling down nearby. "You're safe here." The creature curled up on the blankets, but those intelligent eyes never left Marcus's face. It made that musical sound again, softer this time, almost like a lullaby. Marcus found himself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. As the creature drifted off to sleep, Marcus sat watching it and thinking about what he'd gotten himself into. He was harboring an alien refugee in the ruins of his city, and he had no idea what kind of consequences that might bring. The global government had strict policies about alien contact, and harboring an unauthorized alien could land him in prison. But, looking at the injured creature sleeping peacefully on his spare blankets, Marcus couldn't bring himself to care about regulations. This being had lost everything, just like so many humans had during the war. It needed help, and Marcus had never been able to turn his back on someone in need, human or otherwise. Outside the subway tunnel, the ruins of Seattle continued their silent decay under the afternoon sun. But, in that small underground room, something new was beginning. A friendship that would challenge everything humans thought they knew about the galaxy, and prove that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with compassion. 3 days had passed since Marcus found the creature in the ruins, and their strange partnership had settled into an unexpected rhythm. The alien, whom Marcus had started calling Shadow because of its dark, light-absorbing fur, was healing faster than any Earth animal should have been able to. The splint was already showing signs of being outgrown, and the wounds that had been deep gashes were now pink lines beneath the creature's remarkable fur. Marcus brought food and water each morning, sharing his rations and watching in fascination as Shadow examined each item carefully before eating. The creature seemed to be able to determine which foods were safe through smell and some kind of internal scanning that made its eyes glow brighter. It accepted human food but clearly preferred certain items, showing particular interest in anything with high protein content. Communication had evolved beyond simple gestures. Shadow had started mimicking some of Marcus's words, though its vocal cords couldn't quite reproduce human sounds. Instead, it created something that sounded like a mixture of purring and musical tones that somehow conveyed meaning. Marcus found himself understanding more each day, as if his brain was learning to interpret an entirely new language. On the 4th morning, Marcus arrived at the subway cache to find Shadow standing on all 4 legs, testing its weight carefully. The splint had been removed somehow, and the leg appeared completely healed. The creature moved with fluid grace that reminded Marcus of big cats he'd seen in nature documentaries, but there was something more there. An intelligence in every movement that spoke of advanced thought and planning. "You're feeling better," Marcus said, settling down with his usual coffee and breakfast rations. Shadow approached and made a complex series of musical sounds while gesturing toward the tunnel entrance. The meaning was clear enough: it wanted to leave, to show Marcus something. Marcus hesitated. The underground cache was safe, hidden from government patrols and alien artifact hunters who still combed through the ruins looking for valuable technology. Taking Shadow outside meant risking exposure, and he still didn't know what the consequences might be. But those amber eyes held a look of urgent importance. Shadow wasn't asking for a casual stroll through the ruins. It needed to show Marcus something significant. "All right," Marcus said finally, "but we stay together, and if I say we need to hide, you do it immediately." Shadow's ears perked up, and it made what Marcus had learned was its sound of agreement. They gathered a few supplies and headed up into the morning light. Instead of heading toward the main ruins where Marcus usually walked, Shadow led him deeper into the devastated industrial district. This area had been hit particularly hard during the war, with massive factories and shipping centers reduced to twisted metal and concrete. Most people avoided it because of unstable structures and lingering radiation from alien weapon strikes. Shadow moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to smell the air or listen to sounds Marcus couldn't detect. Its enhanced senses were clearly picking up things that human perception missed entirely. After about an hour of careful navigation through the dangerous terrain, Shadow led Marcus to what appeared to be an unremarkable pile of rubble. But, as they got closer, Marcus realized it wasn't random debris. The rubble was arranged in patterns, and there were sections that showed careful construction rather than destruction. Someone, or something, had built a shelter here and camouflaged it to look like random wreckage. Shadow made an urgent musical sound and began pawing at a section of concrete that looked solid but shifted when touched. Marcus helped move the false barrier aside, revealing an entrance that led down into darkness. "Is this where you were living?" Marcus asked. Shadow's response was a complex series of tones that somehow conveyed both yes and much more than that. This wasn't just a shelter. This was important in ways Marcus didn't yet understand. They descended into what turned out to be a sophisticated underground complex. The tunnels were too regular to be natural, but they didn't match human construction techniques either. The walls had a smooth, organic quality that suggested they had been grown rather than built. Soft bioluminescent strips along the ceiling provided gentle light that was easy on the eyes but revealed every detail clearly. As they went deeper, Marcus began to see technology that made his breath catch. Panels covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when he looked at them directly. Devices that hummed with power but had no visible energy source. And, everywhere, the same organic architecture that suggested a civilization that worked with nature rather than against it. Shadow led him to a central chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The room was vast, with a domed ceiling covered in what looked like stars but moved in patterns that suggested they were some kind of display. In the center of the room stood a device that was clearly alien but somehow beautiful, with flowing curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse with internal light. But what really captured Marcus's attention were the other figures in the chamber. 3 more beings like Shadow, though each was slightly different in size and coloring. They had been waiting, and, when Shadow entered with Marcus, they all turned to study the human with those same intelligent amber eyes. Marcus felt a moment of instinctive fear. He was alone, underground, with 4 alien beings in a place that clearly contained advanced technology. Every military instinct told him he was in a potentially hostile situation. But then, Shadow moved to his side and made a long, complex series of musical sounds directed at the others. The tone was clearly explanatory, and Marcus caught familiar cadences that he associated with Shadow talking about him. The creature was introducing him to its companions. One of the other beings, slightly larger than Shadow and with fur that held subtle silver highlights, approached Marcus slowly. When it was close enough, it extended one of those hand-like paws toward him, clearly mimicking the gesture Shadow had used to share memories. Marcus looked at Shadow, who made an encouraging sound. Taking a deep breath, Marcus reached out and allowed the silver-highlighted being to touch his hand. The mental contact was stronger this time, more controlled. Instead of random images, Marcus received what felt like a structured communication. He saw Shadow's arrival on Earth, part of a refugee ship that had hidden in the asteroid belt after fleeing the destruction of their homeworld. He saw how the ship had been damaged and had crashed in the Pacific Ocean, with only a few survivors making it to shore. The survivors had been living hidden in the ruins for months, trying to repair their communication equipment so they could contact other refugee ships scattered across the galaxy. They were scientists and explorers, not warriors, and they had been studying human civilization while remaining hidden, trying to understand whether humanity might be allies against their common enemy. Shadow had been exploring the ruins alone, searching for materials they needed for their repairs, when the building collapse had trapped it. The others had been searching for Shadow when Marcus found it, and they had been monitoring the situation ever since, trying to decide whether this human could be trusted. When the mental contact ended, Marcus found himself looking at 4 beings who were refugees, scientists, and potential allies all at once. They weren't invaders or scouts for another attack. They were survivors trying to rebuild their lives and continue their work, just like the human communities that had formed in the aftermath of the HFY War. The silver highlighted being made a series of sounds that Shadow translated with its own musical tones. Marcus was getting better at reading the emotional content of their communication, and this felt like a formal greeting and an expression of gratitude. "You're welcome," Marcus said, feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the situation. "I'm just sorry it took so long to find you." Shadow led him to the central device, which Marcus now realized was some kind of communication array. The aliens had been working to repair it, but they needed specific materials that were difficult to find in the ruins. Rare earth metals and crystalline components that had been scattered when their ship crashed. One of the other beings, this one smaller than Shadow with fur that had a blue-black tint, activated a section of the device. Holographic displays appeared in the air, showing star maps and what Marcus realized were shipping routes between solar systems. Red markers indicated Zephyrian-controlled territory, which seemed to be expanding steadily across the galaxy. But there were also green markers, representing free worlds and refugee fleets that were still fighting or had found safe harbor. The display showed that the galaxy was much larger and more complex than humans had imagined, with dozens of species either fighting the Zephyrians or trying to survive their expansion. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Earth wasn't alone in the galaxy, and the Zephyrian attack hadn't been an isolated incident. There was a galactic war going on, with entire civilizations being destroyed or displaced. And, somehow, these 4 refugee scientists had ended up hiding in the ruins of Seattle, trying to re-establish contact with their people while human authorities remained completely unaware of their presence. Shadow moved to another part of the device and activated what appeared to be a different system. New displays showed technical specifications for Zephyrian technology, detailed analysis of their weapons and ships, and what looked like strategic assessments of their military capabilities. The refugees had been studying their enemies, gathering intelligence that could be vital to the resistance. Marcus realized he was looking at information that human military leaders would kill for. The aliens had 3 years of detailed observation and analysis of Zephyrian technology, gained through their own bitter experience and continued monitoring. They understood the enemy in ways that humans couldn't, because they had been fighting this war much longer. "This changes everything," Marcus said quietly. The silver highlighted being approached him again and made what Marcus had learned to recognize as a question. Shadow provided translation through a complex series of tones that somehow conveyed the meaning. They were asking if Marcus thought human leaders could be trusted with this information. It was a fair question, and Marcus found himself thinking carefully before responding. The global government's reaction to unauthorized alien contact had always been harsh. These refugees would likely be captured, imprisoned, and studied rather than treated as potential allies. The information they had gathered would be seized, but the beings who had gathered it would disappear into classified research facilities. "Some of them, maybe," Marcus said finally. "But not the ones in charge. They're too afraid and too focused on control." Shadow made a sound that Marcus interpreted as agreement. The refugees had been monitoring human communications and had reached similar conclusions about human leadership. The blue-black being activated another section of the device, and, suddenly, Marcus was looking at real-time surveillance feeds from around the globe. The aliens had somehow tapped into human communication networks and were monitoring everything from news broadcasts to military communications. They knew about the political tensions between nations, the ongoing struggles to rebuild after the war, and the growing paranoia about alien threats. They also knew about the underground resistance networks that had formed among veterans and survivors who felt the official government response to the war had been inadequate. Groups of people who were preparing for the next attack, sharing resources and information outside official channels. You want to make contact with the resistance, Marcus realized. Not the government, but the people who are actually ready to fight. The response from all four beings was unmistakably positive. They had been studying human culture and had identified the resistance networks as the most likely allies. People who had already proven they were willing to fight against overwhelming odds and who understood the value of information and preparation over political posturing. Marcus found himself faced with a decision that would change the course of his life and potentially the future of human civilization. These refugees were offering to share their knowledge and technology with humanity, but only with the right people. They needed someone to make contact with the resistance networks, someone who could evaluate potential allies and facilitate careful, gradual contact. They were asking him to become a bridge between species, a role he had never imagined and wasn't sure he was qualified for. But, looking around at the advanced technology and the wealth of information these beings had gathered, Marcus knew this was too important to walk away from. "I know some people," he said finally. "Veterans, resistance leaders, scientists who got pushed out of government research programs. People who understand that the next attack is coming and that we need every advantage we can get." Shadow approached and touched his arm again, sharing one final image. Marcus saw human and alien forces working together, sharing technology and knowledge, preparing defenses that could actually stop the Zephyrian expansion. He saw a future where Earth wasn't just a target waiting for the next attack, but part of a galactic alliance fighting back against tyranny. It was a future worth fighting for, and Marcus knew that everything he had experienced as a soldier, everything he had learned about leadership and survival, had been preparing him for this moment. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning, and this time humanity wouldn't be fighting alone. 6 months had passed since Marcus first discovered Shadow in the ruins, and the world had changed in ways that most people couldn't see but everyone could feel. The underground resistance network that had been slowly growing since the war now hummed with new purpose and capabilities that seemed almost magical to those who didn't know the truth. Marcus had become something he never expected, a diplomatic liaison between species. His apartment had been transformed into a communication hub where carefully selected human resistance leaders met with the four refugees to share intelligence and coordinate defensive preparations. The meetings were small, secretive, and always held with multiple escape plans in place. The first recruit had been Sarah Chen, a former aerospace engineer who had been blacklisted from government programs for asking too many questions about alien technology. When Marcus brought her to meet Shadow and the others, her reaction had been everything he'd hoped for. Instead of fear or suspicion, she had shown pure scientific excitement and immediate understanding of what this partnership could mean for humanity's survival. Sarah now spent most of her time working with the blue-black being, whose name was something like Viridian in the musical language of their people. Together, they were reverse engineering Zephyrian technology and developing new defensive systems that combined alien knowledge with human manufacturing capabilities. The second recruit was Colonel James Harrison, a decorated veteran who had been forced into early retirement for criticizing the government's passive defensive strategy. Harrison brought military expertise and connections to underground resistance cells across North America. His first meeting with the aliens had been tense, with the old soldier's hand never leaving his weapon until Shadow had shared memories of their people's own military traditions and honor codes. More recruits followed carefully. Dr. Lisa Park, a xenobiologist who had been studying alien artifacts in secret. Miguel Santos, a communications expert who had been monitoring alien signals since the war ended. Each new member of the alliance was chosen for their skills, their discretion, and their understanding that humanity needed to evolve rapidly if it wanted to survive the coming storm. The alliance's hidden base had grown far beyond the original chamber beneath the ruins. Using technology that seemed like magic to human eyes, the refugees had expanded the underground complex into a sophisticated facility that served as both sanctuary and research center. The organic walls now contain laboratories, workshops, communication centers, and living quarters that accommodated both human and alien needs. But the most important development was the completion of the long-range communication array. After months of scavenging specific materials and painstakingly rebuilding damaged components, the refugees had finally re-established contact with other survivor groups scattered across the galaxy. Marcus stood in the main communication chamber, watching as holographic displays showed incoming messages from refugee fleets, hidden colonies, and resistance cells on dozens of worlds. The galaxy was much more alive than anyone had imagined, and the fight against the Zephyrians was far from over. Shadow, who had become Marcus's closest alien friend and constant companion, stood beside him as new intelligence flowed in. The Zephyrian expansion had slowed in recent months, not because they were weakening, but because they were consolidating their gains and preparing for something much larger. "They're planning a final push," Sarah said, analyzing the latest data streams. "Mass production facilities on conquered worlds, new ship designs, weapons we haven't seen before. They want to finish this war within the next few years." Colonel Harrison studied tactical displays showing Zephyrian fleet movements. "They're not just planning to finish the war. They're planning to eliminate any possibility of future resistance. Complete sterilization of worlds that won't submit." The silver highlighted being, whose name was closest to Luminara in human speech, activated another section of the array. New data appeared, showing something that made everyone in the chamber stop breathing. Earth appeared on multiple target lists, marked for what the Zephyrian military called final processing. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked quietly. The answer came through a combination of alien analysis and human intelligence. 18 months, possibly less. The Zephyrians were already positioning fleets in nearby systems, and advanced scouts were probably already in Earth's solar system, gathering final intelligence for the assault. But the Alliance had been preparing too. In the months since contact had been established, human and alien knowledge had combined to produce defensive technologies that neither species could have developed alone. Energy shields that could deflect Zephyrian weapons, fighter craft that moved like living things, and, most importantly, a communication network that connected Earth's resistance to the galactic community. "We need to go public," Dr. Park said, expressing what everyone had been thinking but no one wanted to say. "The government, the military, everyone needs to know what's coming and what we've learned." Marcus looked around the chamber at the faces of both species represented there. The Alliance had grown strong through secrecy and careful selection, but they had always known that eventually they would need to reveal themselves to prepare Earth for what was coming. "They'll try to arrest us all," Colonel Harrison pointed out. "Unauthorized alien contact is a capital offense under current law. They'll seize everything and probably lock up our alien friends in research facilities." Shadow moved closer to Marcus and made a complex series of musical sounds that conveyed determination and acceptance of risk. The other refugees responded similarly. They had discussed this possibility many times and had reached their decision. Luminara activated another display, showing plans they had been developing in secret. Instead of simply revealing themselves to government authorities, the Alliance would make simultaneous contact with resistance cells worldwide, sharing technology and information directly with the people who were already preparing to fight. At the same time, they would broadcast undeniable proof of the coming attack to the world's communication networks, making it impossible for governments to suppress or ignore the threat. The revelation would cause chaos, but it would also force humanity to face reality and begin real preparations for survival. "It's risky," Sarah admitted, "but doing nothing is riskier. If we wait for the government to figure this out on their own, Earth will be defenseless when the attack comes." Marcus found himself thinking about all the people he had known who had died in the first Zephyrian attack. Friends, neighbors, fellow soldiers who had fought bravely but died because humanity simply hadn't been prepared for the reality of galactic warfare. This alliance, this partnership between species, was their chance to make sure that sacrifice hadn't been in vain. "When do we start?" he asked. The answer was coordinated through the communication array. Resistance cells on 6 continents confirmed they were ready to receive technology packages and alien advisors. Broadcast systems had been prepared to override government communication channels. Everything was in place for what Viridian had termed the Great Revealing. Over the next 3 days, the world changed forever. It started with simultaneous broadcasts on every major communication network on Earth. Instead of the usual government announcements or entertainment programming, people saw something that made them question everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the universe. They saw Marcus Thompson, the old veteran whose story of finding an injured alien had become legend among resistance circles. But this time he wasn't alone. Shadow stood beside him, along with the other 3 refugees, in the hidden chamber beneath Seattle's ruins. Marcus spoke directly to the camera, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen war and knew what was at stake. He told the story simply and honestly, how he had found Shadow, how they had learned to communicate, how the alliance had formed and what they had discovered about the coming threat. But, more importantly, he introduced the refugees not as invaders or threats, but as what they were: survivors, allies, and humanity's best hope for surviving what was coming. The broadcasts included undeniable proof. Zephyrian fleet movements captured by the communication array. Technical analysis of alien weapons and defenses. Most shocking of all, intercepted Zephyrian communications planning the final assault on Earth, with translations provided by the refugees. As the broadcasts continued, something unprecedented happened. Instead of waiting for government response or official orders, resistance cells around the world began revealing themselves and the preparations they had been making. Hidden bunkers opened their doors to show advanced defensive systems. Underground factories displayed new weapons and equipment that combined human and alien technology. The Alliance had given humanity something it had lost in the First War: hope backed by real capability. Government response was swift and predictable. Military units were dispatched to capture the resistance leaders and seize alien technology. Arrest warrants were issued for Marcus and anyone associated with the broadcasts. Official statements denied the validity of the alien intelligence and declared the refugees to be advanced Zephyrian infiltrators. But it was too late for cover-ups. The truth was out, backed by evidence too strong to deny and support too widespread to suppress. More importantly, the technological packages the Alliance had distributed were already being put to use. Cities that had been defenseless weeks before suddenly sprouted energy shield generators and weapon systems that could actually hurt Zephyrian ships. The old world order, built on secrecy and control, crumbled in a matter of days. In its place, something new began to emerge: a truly global resistance network backed by alien allies and advanced technology, united by the knowledge that they were fighting not just for Earth, but for the freedom of every intelligent species in the galaxy. Marcus found himself at the center of this transformation, no longer just an old veteran but a symbol of what was possible when different species worked together toward common goals. Shadow remained at his side through it all. The partnership that had started with simple compassion now expanded into something that would reshape the fate of worlds. The Zephyrians were still coming. Their final fleet was already moving toward Earth's solar system, confident that they would find the same defenseless world they had partially conquered before. But, this time, they would face something they had never encountered in their campaigns of conquest: a world that was ready for them, backed by allies they didn't know existed and wielding technology that combined the best of multiple civilizations. The second battle for Earth was about to begin, and, for the first time since the war started, humanity had a real chance of winning. As Marcus stood in the command center of what had become the Alliance's primary base, watching displays that showed defensive preparations across the globe, he reflected on the strange path that had brought him to this moment. A simple act of compassion for an injured creature had grown into something that would determine the survival of 2 species and, possibly, the future of galactic civilization. Shadow approached and touched his arm, sharing one final image: Earth as seen from space, surrounded not by attacking fleets but by the ships of a dozen allied species, all united in the defense of freedom and the right of every world to determine its own destiny. It was a future worth fighting for, and Marcus knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The galaxy had learned what humans were truly capable of when they fought not just for survival, but for the protection of others. And that lesson would echo across the stars for generations to come.